Back to Civil Discourse Now. I'm Mark Small.
I'm Paul Ogden.
We've been talking about, this is October 27th, 2012, a very beautiful, sunny, crisp autumn day. We've been talking about the Electoral College. And we were talking about the history of the Electoral College. 1800, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr tied for, in electoral votes, for the office of President of the United States. That was rather contentious. There were 36 ballots that were cast in the House of Representatives because if there's a tie, it goes to the House.
Correct. It goes to the high. Now, one thing that I want to emphasize, and we did talk about a little bit, the Electoral College was intended to be a deliberative body. It was not meant to just be a rubber stamp. They thought these really smart men, back then men, would sit around and debate about who would be the best president. And it hasn't worked like that at all.
Because very quickly the states started, and the states and the parties acting in concert.
Right.
They wanted everybody to just toe whatever line it was
and
that's out there.
States are free to decide how they're going to award their electoral votes. They could do it by popular vote. Up until about 1936, the actual electors were listed on the ballot, but that's no longer the case.
And so, 1800, we had the fiasco with Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr became despondent and shot Alexander Hamilton in a duel several years later. Actually had nothing to do with the Electoral College.
Which he was the last vice president to shoot someone and kill Cheney.
Yeah, that's true. Cheney will go down in history as having similarities to Aaron Burr. It was said of Burr was impeached. No, I'm sorry. There was a Supreme Court justice who was impeached.
Yeah,
that was
Hayes?
No. But he was impeached. Chase in 1804. Burr presided over the Senate, and so he was the presiding officer over the justice's trial. And Burr was wanted on murder charges in 2 states. I believe it was New York and New Jersey.
Actually, I think didn't the Chief Justice preside over that?
No, it was.
Oh, he was the Chief Justice, right?
No, Vice President Burr presided over the trial in the Senate chambers, and it was said in the papers at the time that usually it's the murderer who's brought before the judge, not that the judge is brought before the murderer.
Yeah, sure.
So after that fiasco in 1800, the 12th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, and that kind of said, well, we aren't going to have this happen anymore.
Right. So that you don't have the situation where you have the vice president be the second,
but
one that gets the second most electoral votes.
But you can still get fewer popular votes and lose the Electoral College.
Correct, and that's happened 3 times, I believe.
Tilden Hayes, as one of our members of our audience pointed out when we were here, our audience is here today.
Yes.
Pointed out Tilden Hayes in 1876. Tilden was leading, he was ahead on everything, but then he brought in the votes from Oregon. Oregon was critical, I believe, and they did some last-minute hijinks, I think, it could be said, and then Rutherford B. Hayes was elected president. In similar fashion to how George W. Bush won the presidency in 2000.
Yeah, Rutherford B. Hayes, what happened was the Republicans had been behind the, what's the word I'm looking for here, in the South, what's it called? When
the South?
No, the federal government came in and took over Reconstruction. Thank you for stepping in. Was behind Reconstruction, and part of the deal to give Hayes to the White House is that the Republicans would back off on Reconstruction and pull out of the South.
So that was convenient for them. And then we've had very few instances in which third-party candidates have had a major effect on the outcome of a race, but certainly the election of 1912 was significant because Theodore Roosevelt ran as candidate for the Bull Moose Party.
Progressive Party, Bull Moose Party, nicknamed the Bull Moose Party. You know why he was nicknamed as Bull Moose? Because he got shot during one of his speeches, and he continued to speak for another 3 hours, even though he had blood. He had been shot in the chest. They asked him how he was. He says, "I feel as fit as a bull moose."
Well, and that's important to know, but the 1912 election was one in which the third-party candidate, Theodore Roosevelt,
finished second,
ahead of the incumbent, William Howard Taft.
Right.
And then
sitting president finished third.
And then arguably the 1968 election was affected by third-party candidate George Wallace, but I don't think in the sense of having an effect on the outcome of the Electoral College.
Yeah, I don't think so. It was a very, very close election.
But I think the reason that it had an effect was Richard Nixon realized from that election that he could split the South, and if he became less aggressive on civil rights policies, or at least said that he was, then he could calve off what had traditionally been the solid South.
Because up until that time, the Republican Party was seen as more the civil rights party. In 64, Civil Rights Act, 65 Voting Rights Act, over 80% of Republicans voted for those acts, while it was only like 60% of Democrats. And that was part of the Southern strategy.
So we come up to...
Really, it was Goldwater in 64 that really caused the rift with African Americans.
Yeah, but Goldwater didn't get enough votes from people overall for anybody to recognize anything from what he was doing.
He was the first one that got about 10% of the black vote. Up until that time, it was like 33%.
So
I think Nixon did a lot better than Goldwater did in 68.
Well, then we come to... I don't think that there was much of an effect on the electoral outcome either in 80 when Anderson ran, because that was that wasn't an effect.
I don't think he won us. Did he win us?
No, and I don't believe that the only third party candidate who's had an effect arguably wasn't because of the electoral vote itself. It was because Ralph Nader took at least 547.
Ralph Nader, and there's talk about Ross Perot a couple times.
Yeah, but I think Nader had a lot more of an effect in terms of, in 2000, George W. Bush probably wouldn't have won Florida, but for Ralph Nader having run there. So we come to the present time, and we have a bunch...
In 2000, we had a president elected in the Electoral College who didn't win the popular vote.
Well, that's correct, and he didn't really win. He didn't really win in the Electoral College. He won in the Supreme Court.
Oh, well, we'll have to disagree with that.
That was a 5-4 edge he had there.
It was 7-2 edge. The vote was 7-2 when it came to whether Florida followed the law. The equal protection challenge was 7-2. The vote on whether to give them a chance to recount was 5-4.
And that was critical. But we then come to today, and we have concededly a tight election right now.
Very tight.
The national average poll put out by RealPolitik shows Romney with 47.9 and President Obama with 46.9% of the popular vote.
Yeah, I saw that. That's about a 1-point lead. I saw like 0.9. But the way that splits in terms of electoral votes, it shows President Obama with a solid 201, Romney with a solid 191. Amongst those 191 votes are Indiana's. I don't know how they can call Indiana a solid Republican state. Actually, there are more solid Republican states.
Yeah, I know.
Indiana's only about 10 points. There's states like, Utah, Idaho are more Republican.
No, that's true. I don't know if they're more Republican, but they have more Mormons there.
True.
Then you have 146 toss-up states. And
correct.
Amongst those, and these are the ones that are getting the big air time, especially. Pennsylvania has 20 electoral votes, but they're showing Obama is up 4.8%. And I haven't seen Pennsylvania, and that's important because
that would be huge.
Margin of error is like 2 or 2.5% on these.
At least probably maybe like 3.
So if you get above 3, you're looking at a pretty solid advantage on those electoral votes.
Actually, and it's something we learned in court, that what do they call it, confidence interval,
Mm-hmm.
or it's like a margin of error. It's actually 3 points on either side. So it'd have to be, if it's a 3-point margin of error, it's 6 point. You have to be above 6 point to be outside the margin of error. Because Obama could be off 3 and one way, and then the other person could be off 3 the other way.
Okay, so
So
still 4.8 for Pennsylvania, and I have not seen
there's been
President,
some close polls recently there.
but not anything. I mean,
There used to be like 10 points there.
yeah, but there hasn't been anything close. I mean,
I'd be shocked if Pennsylvania goes to Romney.
yeah. So you've got 20 votes in Pennsylvania. Michigan has had is it 4 on average for President Obama?
Yeah. Though Michigan, there was a poll just the other day. I think that might even had Romney in the lead, but I still would be shocked if he wins Michigan.
And here's a question that I have not been able to answer by researching this, is whether the early voters are included in the polling, because they poll likely voters and they poll people who are registered to vote.
Right.
But I don't, I've seen that they polled the voters coming out who have voted, but I don't know that they factor those into the polls as they're averaged out and reported to the media. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you mean. When they call you up on the phone, they ask, are you likely to vote? And you say, I've already voted. What do they do at that point in the poll? Do they hang up and say thank you? I think they count them, but how they go about counting them, I don't know.
And I think that's a lot more important, because if we're looking at, for example, if you're looking at Ohio right now with a 2.3 margin for Obama, but something like 30% of the people have already, let's say, have already voted, and they're strongly for President Obama, well, that's going to offset that 2.3. That's going to really make that a low number.
I would imagine that is included in there.
That's imagining about these numbers, and I don't know that.
Well, pollsters are scientists, just like the scientists we saw in court the other day.
So we have Michigan and Pennsylvania look solidly for President Obama. Wisconsin was 2.3.
Well, I don't know if I'd say solid. They seem to be leaning.
Well, leaning, but you said you'd be
I'd be shocked.
Okay, you'd be
shocked.
So we've got the Ogden shock factor.
Yeah, shocked.
So those two. Now, on the other hand, North Carolina, and I'm correct. I'll correct something I said last week. I thought that Romney's people had pulled out of North Carolina, and that's something. And I got that wrong because I heard that on Fox. But
that happens.
Romney is shown as at 3.8 in North Carolina.
Yeah, though I just saw an article today that there's a poll that came in that had a lot closer.
Yeah, but
it might have had Obama actually in the lead in North Carolina. I'd be shocked if North Carolina goes to Obama on election day.
And I'm quoting when I'm saying these numbers, I'm using the RealPolitik average of all the polls.
Right.
So if you look at North Carolina, that is 15 electoral votes.
Big state, yeah. I mean, Romney loses that, he's gone. If he loses North Carolina,
I see we're right towards the end of the second segment, and we'll be right back.
Candy Crawley was totally